Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm planning to share my 2025 TBR with you. I have 16 books on my TBR, and I'm also trying out a new mic situation, so hopefully the audio will be better in this video. So anyway, let's get into my TBR for 2025. The first book on my 2025 TBR is Shades of Magic by V.E. Schwab. And I read the Darker Shade of Magic series, I believe like 2 years ago now, and I really enjoyed that one, and I've been meaning to pick this one up. I believe it follows a new Antari named Tess. This takes place after the first trilogy, and it revisits some of the old characters that we got to know in the first trilogy and introduces new characters. And I'm just really excited to delve into this world again and this magic system. And if you haven't read A Darker Shade of Magic, these books take place in parallel universes in London. So there's Grey London, there's Red London, Black London, and White London. And they all have different levels of magic, and Antari are the only magicians that can pass between the worlds, and they can use, I forgot what it's called exactly, but there's different elements that they can use, and Antari can use all of them, and there's other magicians who can only use maybe one or two. I believe this book follows a character named Tess, who is an Antari, and I think we get to find out what her story is. This one takes place 7 years after the first trilogy, and I'm really excited to delve into this one. The next book on my 2025 TBR is The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne, and this is the first book in the Bloodsworn saga, and I believe this is a Norse-based fantasy that follows a whole cast of characters, and this takes place in a world where the old gods, I believe, have died and they've fallen into myth and legend, and I'm not entirely sure the full premise of the book. I don't love knowing too much about stories before I start reading them, but I've heard really great things about this one, and I'm just really excited to read it this year. So the third book on my 2025 TBR is actually a series of books. It's the Mistborn Era 2 quartet. I read Mistborn Era 1 last year and I really enjoyed that, but I wanted to wait a little bit of time before I read Era 2, just because I don't want to compare them too directly, because I've heard mixed things about Era 2, but I think I will enjoy it if I go in with the right expectations. So I'm expecting this to be a bit different than Era 1, but I am very excited to read more about the magic system and get to know a whole new cast of characters in this world. Era 2 takes place a few hundred years after Era 1, so all the events that happened in Era 1 are now kind of part of the local legend on this world, and I'm very excited to read this series. I think this is the last major Brandon Sanderson series that I have yet to read. I think I've read most of his books by now that I have wanted to read, so this will complete my exploration of Brandon Sanderson books. I'm excited to read Mistborn Era 2 this year. The next book on my 2025 TBR is The Great Hunt by Robert Jordan, and this is the next book in the Wheel of Time series that I have yet to read. I started Wheel of Time last year and I really enjoyed it, but I think I'll be kind of slowly progressing through the books rather than binge reading all of them at once. So I really want to read The Great Hunt this year. I don't think this really needs a whole lot of summary. It is a classic within the genre. So I'm really excited to pick up this book this year and find out what happens next in the Wheel of Time. So the next book on my 2025 TBR I don't actually have yet because it has yet to be released, and that is Emily Wilde's Compendium of Lost Tales. I am very excited about this book. I read Emily Wilde last year and I really enjoyed it. If you don't know, Emily Wilde follows a professor who studies fairies, and she travels around to different countries to study the local fae and complete her various projects. Her rival is a man named Wendell B, I think. Is that his name? It's a very funny name. He is her rival and he sort of follows her around on her various different quests. And I am very excited to delve into the next book and find out what happens next in the series. The second book, oh, it was just so good. I am very excited to find out what happens next. Emily tends to be very reclusive and unsocial, which can sometimes give her trouble with the locals, but Wendelby is the complete opposite of her and is very friendly and outgoing and just has no trouble making connections with the locals. So the juxtaposition of their personalities is quite fun to read, and I'm just very excited about this one. I'm very much looking forward to continuing their adventures in this book. So the next book on my 2025 TBR is a book that has been on my TBR for quite some time, and that is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. This book takes place in the same universe as Shadow and Bone, which I read a couple of years ago. It follows a whole cast of characters who are trying to execute a heist, and I'm sure many of you already know what this book is about. It's a very, very popular book. I just haven't read it yet, and I'm very excited to read it because I've heard great things about it. This is on my TBR for 2025. So the next book on my TBR for 2025 is Throne of Glass. I have not read this book. I don't think I intend to read the whole series, but I at least want to read the first 2 or 3 books to know what people are talking about when they talk about Throne of Glass. I read A Court of Thorns and Roses a couple years ago now, and this is the only other Sarah J. Maas series that I have any interest in reading. And I'm sure most of you know what the premise of this book is already. It is a very popular book, but basically we follow an assassin, and I honestly don't know too much more than that. Knowing Sarah J. Maas, I kind of have an idea of what to expect. This is on my TBR for 2025. I will probably get this book from the library. I don't own it. The next book on my 2025 TBR is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, and I got this beautiful edition actually for half price because it is slightly damaged. There's a little tear in the dust jacket, and that's why it was half price. Like, of course I picked it up. So this is a high fantasy that takes place in China. I'm very excited to read a fantasy that's not Western centered and that is written by a person of color. I definitely want to read more books written by people of color. I believe it's very important to hear lots of different perspectives, and it seems very common in booktube that most of the authors that people read from are whites and straight and all that. But I think it is very important to seek out other books. And this is a very popular book. This isn't like an unknown book or anything. I read Babel last year. That one was quite brutal, and I'm expecting this one to be just as brutal. I am very excited to read this one. Oh, the cover is so beautiful. Like, look at that. It's so pretty. And the sprayed edges, like, oh my goodness. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. So the next book on my 2025 TBR is Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. I've heard a lot of great things about this book. It is the first book in a trilogy that is part of a larger series, I believe, that takes place in the same universe. So I think this is a great place to start with Robin Hobb's work, and after reading most of Brandon Sanderson's books last year, I'm ready to delve into some other authors. And I don't know too much about the premise of this book. I know it involves an assassin who is a royal bastard. I'm just very excited to read this one this year. The next book on my 2025 TBR is A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping by Sengu Mandana. I believe this book has been pushed back several times, but I read A Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches a couple years ago now. It was one of the first books I read when I got back into reading, so I am very excited to read. I don't believe this is a sequel, but like the next book in this world. The first book was very endearing, so I am very excited to read another book from this author. I believe it takes place at an inn that's run by a witch, and she has all these interactions with the clientele, and there's a romance, and it just seems like a very interesting premise for a book, and it seems like it would be a very cozy book, so I'm excited to read that this year. Hopefully it comes out this year. I know it's been pushed back a few times, so hopefully we can read it this year. The next book on my 2025 TBR is A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. I've read a couple of the books by Naomi Novik. I read Spinning Silver and Uprooted couple years ago, I think. So I'm excited to read another book from her. I've heard good things about this one. I believe it's a trilogy or a series. One of my friends actually got this book as well recently, so maybe I'll do a buddy read with her. That might be fun. And I believe this book follows a girl named Elle, I think, which is funny because that's one of my nicknames. But she goes to a magic school. This book gives me dark academia sort of vibes, and it seems like the stakes are high. I don't know too much about it, but I am very excited to read this one this year. The next book on my 2025 TBR is Gideon the Ninth by Tasmin Muir. I've heard good things about this one. It's supposed to be a sci-fi. It's sapphic. It involves necromancy, so like all the good things. I did start listening to the audiobook for this last year, but I didn't really like the audiobook narrator very much. Maybe that's just a me issue, but I think I would prefer to like physically read this book. So I'm gonna try again this year because I really do want to read it. I'm very excited about this one. The next book on my 2025 TBR is A Curious Beginning by Deanna Raybourn. Honestly, this book is on my TBR because Katie Who's Reading has recommended it many times and I'm curious, so I want to read it. I believe it's part of the Veronica Speedwell series and it features a character named Veronica who's an orphan and she studies butterflies. The series also centers around her relationship with another character named Stoker. She's solving mysteries, going on adventures. It just sounds like a very interesting concept and I'm excited to read this book this year. The next book on my 2025 TBR is All Systems Red by Martha Wells. This book is a sci-fi and it features a character who is a murderbot. I don't know if that's his name, but the main character is a robot and he's hacked his own system, I think, and he loves to watch soap operas and he works for humans, but he's kind of scornful of them. I believe this series discusses a lot of the ethics of like AI intelligence versus human intelligence and where the line is, because our main character seems like a very sentient AI. And I think that's quite an interesting concept in this day and age, like what counts as a person who has rights and what is just like a machine who does tasks for you. And I am excited to read more sci-fi this year too, because I haven't read a lot of sci-fi. I'm very excited to read this year. It's a series of novellas. They are shorter books. I think it sounds like quite a cozy sci-fi and I'm very excited about it. Speaking of cozy sci-fis, the next book on my list is A Palm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. I'm very excited about this one. I believe it's a bit of a philosophical sci-fi. I believe it takes place in a world where robots have sort of disappeared. This book features a robot and I believe his relationship with a monk. And the robot's trying to answer the question like, what do people need? And it just sounds like a very cozy philosophical read and it's very short. It's just a novella. And I would love to read the second one in this series too if I enjoy this one. The next book on my 2025 TBR is a very classic murder mystery. I want to read Murder at the Vicarage by Agatha Christie. I believe everyone's heard of Agatha Christie, but I've never read one of her books, so I definitely want to fix that this year. I've heard really good things about her work, and I'm very excited to read some of her books. I believe this one is the first book in the Miss Marple series, and I don't know too much about Agatha Christie's characters or series, but this seemed like an excellent place to start with her work, and I'm very excited to read this year. So that concludes my TBR for 2025. Please leave a comment and let me know what books you are planning to read this year. I'd love to know. Have a beautiful day and I will see you in my next video. Bye!